All right, so we're diving deep today into something that's caused a whole lot of buzz, the Supreme Court's decision to uphold that TikTok ban here in the U.S.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It is a big one.
Right.
We've got legal documents, news reports, the whole shebang to try and figure out what this actually means, especially for businesses, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because this goes way beyond just viral dances and funny videos, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
we're talking a platform that millions of Americans use and a lot of them have built their livelihoods on. This ban, I mean, it has the potential to really shake things up in the digital economy.
Absolutely. So let's break this down a little bit. The Supreme Court essentially just said okay to this federal law, which basically makes TikTok illegal here unless ByteDance, its Chinese parent company, sells it. And the deadline for that is Sunday, January 19th.
Talk about a ticking clock.
I know. So this whole thing has been going on for years, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I vaguely remember Trump trying to do the same thing back in 2020.
Yeah, you're right. That was really the starting point. But those executive orders, they got caught up in all sorts of legal battles. But even when Biden came in, the concerns about TikTok's ties to China and those potential national security risks, those never really went away. Both sides tried to come to an agreement, hammer something out.
Right.
But nothing worked out. And then in April of last year, Biden signed that law that led to the Supreme Court decision. And what I find really interesting is that it passed with overwhelming support from both sides of the aisle.
So national security, that's the big concern here. But what exactly were they worried about?
So it really boils down to data. I mean, just think about it. TikTok collects a massive amount of information from its users, not just your basic profile stuff, but things like your phone contacts, even your keystroke patterns.
Keystroke patterns, really? What's so sensitive about that?
Well, apparently how you type, the rhythm, the timing, it can be almost like a digital fingerprint. And it can reveal a lot about you. And some cybersecurity experts, they even say that this data can be used to get around certain security measures. So you can see why the government's a little on edge about all this data potentially ending up in the hands of the Chinese government.
Right. And they're saying that China's laws could essentially force ByteDance to hand over all that data.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I feel like we've all heard these rumors about TikTok being this spy app. But has anybody actually proven that China is accessing user data?
Well, that's where things get a little murky. The government hasn't actually shown any solid proof of, data being misused.
Okay.
But they argue that the risk is just too high to ignore, and it looks like the Supreme Court agreed.
So it's all about trying to stop those potential threats, even if they haven't happened yet.
Okay, but let's talk about the people who are caught in the middle of all this. Millions of Americans use TikTok, and for a lot of them, it's not just, a way to pass the time, it's their business. Right. And this ban, I mean, it could be really damaging to a whole section of the digital economy. Content creators, influencers, small businesses, musicians, artists, they're all using TikTok to reach people, build their brands, and make a living.
Yeah, there's a story here about Desiree Hill. She owns a mechanic shop, and she's been using TikTok to get new customers. And she's genuinely worried that this ban could just wipe out her business entirely.
Yeah, and Desiree's story, that's just one example. There are so many people just like her. They've put in the time, the energy, the money to build something on TikTok, and to have it all ripped away, I mean, it's a huge blow.
It really puts things into perspective.
Huh.
The digital world and our real-world livelihoods are so connected. Okay, so what actually happens on Sunday if ByteDance can't find a buyer? Does TikTok just disappear, poof?
Well, first off, it's going to be gone from app stores, so no new downloads. But for the people who already have it, things won't be the same. They'll still be able to use the app for a bit, but they won't get any more updates. And without updates, eventually, the app will just become useless.
So even if you already have it, it's kind of like a ticking time bomb, just slowly becoming obsolete.
Exactly. It creates so much uncertainty, especially for those businesses that rely on it. It's not just about losing followers. It's about losing their whole way of connecting with their audience, marketing their products, and making money.
So how's TikTok responding to all of this? I mean, they must be fighting back, right?
Oh, absolutely they are. They've been arguing in court that this whole ban is unconstitutional, way too extreme. They're saying that there are other ways to deal with the government's concerns.
Like what? What kind of alternatives are they suggesting?
Well, one of their main points is that the U.S. hasn't actually shown that China's misusing data. And they also say that China already has other ways to get information on Americans, so why single out TikTok?
Okay, so it's a clash of perspectives, national security versus individual freedom. But in the end, the Supreme Court sided with the government. So what was their logic behind that?
Well, they basically said that Those potential national security risks are bigger than the free speech concerns, especially because Congress is supposed to anticipate future threats. So they're giving Congress a lot of leeway on this.
Interesting. So they're acknowledging the limitations on free speech, but saying that national security is a bigger priority in this case.
And you have to remember that all this is happening with those growing tensions between the US and China in the background. I mean, it's not really just about the app, it's about who's going to control, like, the economy and technology in the world.
Right. It's almost like TikTok is this like battleground in a much bigger fight.
Exactly. And that just makes things even tougher for businesses who are caught in the middle of all this.
Okay, so let's talk about that potential sale. Is there anyone out there who could realistically buy TikTok and still keep the U.S. government happy?
Well, there have been some rumors. A bunch of investors led by Frank McCourt, you know, the guy who used to own the LA Dodgers,
Yeah.
they've shown some interest. But even if they make an offer, it's going to have to jump through all kinds of hoops with regulators.
And remember that qualified divestiture we talked about. That's not an easy thing to pull off. It's not like just handing over the keys and saying, see you later.
It would be a massive change.
Yeah.
They'd have to completely separate everything about TikTok in the U.S., the data, the algorithm, all of it from ByteDance. And the U.S. government's going to be watching every single step to make sure that they're taking those national security concerns seriously.
Right. And think about the human side of this, too. Imagine you're a TikTok creator, you've built this loyal following, maybe even a whole business around it, and suddenly there's a new owner. Who knows what that'll mean for your content, your reach, your whole livelihood.
Right. It's a total gamble.
Yeah.
And that uncertainty is really tough on those businesses. You know, they're stuck in limbo trying to decide if they should jump to a new platform or just wait and see what happens.
Yeah. And then there's President-elect Trump. He's been hinting that he might try to step in and negotiate something.
It's kind of crazy how he's positioning himself as this potential deal maker, even though it was his administration that first tried to ban TikTok back in 2020.
Politics is weird.
Yeah.
But one thing that I find really interesting is this whole debate about manipulating content. The government is worried that China could be using TikTok's algorithm to change what Americans are seeing and what they believe. How does that even work? I mean, isn't TikTok's right to free speech to decide what content they show users?
That's where things get really tricky. See, algorithms are designed to decide what we see online, to show us what they think we want to see. The concern is that someone could mess with those algorithms to push certain ideas or hide others.
So it's not like outright censorship, but more like nudging people in a certain direction.
Exactly. It's a much more subtle way to influence people, which makes it harder to spot and regulate. And you're right, it does raise some big questions about free speech. Actually, Justice Gorsuch even brought this up in his opinion. He agreed with the decision, but he also said he's worried about how they're using classified evidence in this case.
So even within the Supreme Court, there are some doubts about how this is going to play out in reality.
Yeah, and that brings us to the core of the problem. How do we create roles for something as complicated and constantly changing as the internet without stopping innovation or messing with free speech? I mean, there are no easy answers.
This whole case feels like we're in uncharted territory. Most of the laws and precedents we have were made before the internet even existed.
It's like trying to squeeze a square block into a round hole. The legal system's trying to catch up to the digital world, but it's not easy.
Okay, so let's say ByteDance can't find a buyer and the ban actually happens. What happens to all those businesses that depend on TikTok? Do they just have to start all over again on a different platform?
It would be a huge setback, that's for sure. They'd lose their American audience, their networks, their whole online world. And building that back up on a different platform takes time, effort, and often money. Some businesses might be able to adapt, but for others, it could be really tough.
We talked about Desiree, that mechanic shop owner. But what about other businesses like musicians who got their start on TikTok or artists who sell their work through the platform?
It would affect so many people. Think about all the companies that built their whole marketing strategy around TikTok. They'd have to change everything really fast, and there's no guarantee they'd be as successful somewhere else.
It's like a whole online economy getting uprooted.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It makes you think about how risky it is to build a business on just one platform, especially when it's caught up in all this global politics.
So what can businesses do to protect themselves in this kind of situation?
Well, not putting all their eggs in one basket is key. They need to be on multiple platforms, so if one disappears, they're not totally sunk.
And I imagine it's super important to stay up to date on the legal and political stuff too, right?
Absolutely. Businesses need to know the risks and make smart choices based on how things are changing. This whole TikTok situation is a wake-up call. The digital world has real-world consequences.
Okay, so we've covered the legal battles, the national security stuff, and the impact on businesses. But let's not forget about the people, right? Millions of TikTok users just enjoy using the app. They've found a community there. What happens to those communities if the ban actually happens?
That's a tough one to measure. These online communities can be really important, especially for people who feel alone or left out in the real world. For a lot of young people, TikTok is more than just an app. It's part of their culture, their entertainment, how they connect with friends.
And for some, it's how they express themselves creatively, share their talents, and find a wider audience.
Exactly. So while we're figuring out the national security side of things, we have to remember that this ban affects way more than just politics and economics. It affects how we connect with each other and our online culture. And that's something to think about.
So here we are, waiting to see what happens with this potential sale. What are the most likely scenarios we could see in the next few days?
Well, there are a few possibilities. First, and maybe the worst case scenario for a lot of people, is that ByteDance refuses to sell and the ban happens on Sunday.
Wow, that would be a big deal. What happens then?
Probably a lot of chaos as people try to download their stuff, find new platforms, and deal with losing their favorite app.
And for businesses depending on TikTok, it would be like hitting a wall.
Yeah, all that work just gone. They'd have to scramble to find new ways to reach their audience.
Okay, so that's one possibility. What else could happen?
Another possibility is that ByteDance agrees to a sale, but something goes wrong. Maybe they can't find a buyer that the U.S. government approves of, or the negotiations fall apart.
So even if you want to sell, there's no guarantee it'll actually work out.
Exactly. And that just creates more uncertainty. Would the ban be delayed? Would TikTok be shut down in the U.S. for who knows how long? It's a waiting game with a lot of unknowns.
And then there's the best case scenario, right? The one everyone's hoping for.
That's where ByteDance finds a buyer that makes the U.S. government happy, the deal goes through without a hitch, and TikTok keeps going in the U.S. with a new owner.
But even then, it might not be a perfect ending, right? There could still be some challenges.
Oh, for sure. The new owner would have a big job ahead of them. They'd have to keep TikTok popular and navigate the constantly changing social media world, all while reassuring users and building trust back up after all this drama.
And they'd have the U.S. government and all those TikTok users watching their every move.
Talk about pressure. But if they're smart, they'll focus on being open, protecting user privacy, and creating a positive community.
So those are the three main possibilities. The ban happens, the sale falls through, or the sale works out. Any other surprises we should be thinking about?
Well, don't forget about the wild card. President-elect Trump. He's hinted that he might try to work out a deal himself.
Yeah, he's known for doing things his own way, so who knows what he'll do. What do you think he might try?
It's hard to say for sure. He could try to make a deal that lets TikTok stay in the U.S. while addressing those national security worries. Or he might use this as leverage to get something from China on other issues, like trade or intellectual property.
It's a reminder that politics and technology are totally mixed up, and what a few powerful people decide can change the whole digital world.
And for businesses that rely on platforms like TikTok, it means they have to be flexible, adaptable, and aware of the bigger picture. Things change fast in the digital world, and those changes can be big and unexpected.
It feels like we're at this crossroads, with this whole TikTok situation. This case has brought up so much, not just between the U.S. and China, but here in America, too.
It is pretty fascinating to see how it's brought all these different groups together, each with their own worries. You've got the free speech folks who are afraid of censorship, the national security experts focused on protecting data, and then millions of everyday users who just love the app and don't want it to go away.
And then there are the businesses, the creators, the entrepreneurs who've built their careers on TikTok. This ban could really change the whole digital economy.
Yeah, it really highlights how connected our online world is to our real lives and how we make a living. Finding solutions that work for everyone in this whole messy situation is a really tough challenge.
So let's step back for a second and think about the bigger picture. What does this case mean for data privacy in general? It's definitely made people more aware of how much data apps like TikTok are collecting.
Absolutely. It's made people think about the risks and started a conversation about how we can protect our information online. And it goes beyond just TikTok, right? It makes you wonder how much data we're really okay with sharing with any app, any platform, and how much control we actually have over that information.
Do you think this could lead to stricter rules for all social media companies, not just TikTok?
It's definitely possible. We've already seen a push for stronger privacy laws here in the US and in Europe. This case might give that movement even more momentum. People want more transparency and control over their data, and it seems like lawmakers are finally paying attention.
It might also encourage people to be more careful about which apps they use and what information they share online. Maybe we'll see a shift towards platforms that are more focused on privacy or a bigger demand for tools that give users more control over their data.
It's about time. We need to move away from this take it or leave it attitude about data privacy. Users should have a choice in how their information is collected, used, and shared.
All right, let's shift gears a bit and talk about the business world. We've talked about content creators, but this ban could also be a big problem for companies that use TikTok for marketing and advertising. They've put a lot of time and money into building a presence on this platform.
Oh, absolutely. This ban could be a major roadblock for any company that's made TikTok a part of their marketing strategy. They'll need to adjust quickly and find other ways to reach their customers.
It also creates uncertainty for companies that were thinking about using TikTok in the future. Now they have to weigh the possible benefits against the risk that the app might suddenly become unavailable.
It's a tough decision, and it shows how important it is for businesses to be flexible and ready to adapt in the digital world. Things are always changing online, and sometimes those changes are big and unexpected.
This whole situation really emphasizes how important it is to not rely on just one platform. If your business depends entirely on one platform, you're putting yourself at risk.
Exactly. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. You need to be on multiple platforms, so if one disappears, you're not starting from scratch.
Okay, so we've talked about the legal stuff, the political side, and the effects on businesses. But before we finish up, I want to come back to the human side of this story. Millions of people use TikTok to connect with each other, be creative, and express themselves. What happens to those communities if the app goes away?
That's a hard thing to measure. These online communities can be so important, especially for people who feel isolated or like they don't belong in the offline world. For a lot of young people, TikTok is more than just an app. It's part of their culture, how they have fun, how they connect with friends.
And for some, it's a way to be creative, share their talents, and connect with a bigger audience.
Right. So while we're trying to figure out the national security side of things, we can't forget that this ban goes way beyond just politics and economics. It affects how we connect with each other and our online culture. That's something worth thinking about.
As we try to figure out this complicated digital world, we need to find a way to balance security with people's need to express themselves and connect with each other. This TikTok situation has started an important conversation, and it's one we need to keep having.
I totally agree. This isn't just about one app. It's about what the internet will be like in the future and how we'll live our lives online.
So as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a few key thoughts. The TikTok story is a reminder that the online world isn't separate from our real lives. It's part of how we live, work, and interact as a society.
It's also a wake-up call to pay attention to data privacy and to demand more transparency and control over our digital footprint.
And it shows how hard it is to balance national security and individual freedoms in a world where everything is so connected.
The decisions we make today will shape what the digital world looks like in the future. So stay informed, be part of the conversation, and be aware of how your choices online affect the world around you.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.